They told her to simply pour the imported sparkling water and keep her mouth firmly shut. They had codified her silence, assuring her that in this exclusive world, she was less than a person. She was invisible. But when Sienna Brooks, a struggling 26-year-old waitress at Manhattan's most exclusive hushed steakhouse, glided past table 42, she saw something that 30 highly paid PhDs and a year of R&D had somehow missed. Spread across the pristine white linen was a massive, hand-annotated blueprint for a catastrophic failing $100 million turbine engine. The chief operating officer was openly sobbing into his single malt. The key investors were already gathering their coats. In that brief, charged split second, Sienna didn't just refill a wine glass. She grabbed a bright red marker and swiftly drew a single, elegant line that fundamentally saved the company. Yet, it wasn't the fix that stunned them into silence. It was the dark, dangerous secret revealed the very moment she signed her name. A name that belonged not to a server, but to a genius who had disappeared. The deluge outside in Manhattan was more than just rain. It was a cold, aggressive sheet of water, driven sideways by the wind, slapping against the tinted windows of the obsidian room. This restaurant, the Vault, was a fortress of dark glass and power, so secretive that its phone number was guarded like state intelligence, and reservations were often willed down through generations. Inside, the air was thick, smelling of aged mahogany, rare truffle oil, and the dry, inescapable musk of inherited wealth. For Sienna Brooks, the scent was a visceral, daily reminder of everything she had once had, everything she had lost, and everything she currently couldn't afford. She adjusted the knot of her tight black bow tie in the reflection of a polished brass railing. She looked devastatingly tired. At 26, she carried the bruised purple of chronic exhaustion beneath her eyes, circles so deep no amount of cheap drugstore concealer could hope to hide them. Her ash-blonde hair was dragged back into a severe, painful bun, a required part of the uniform that gave her a perpetual, low-grade headache. Table 7 needs a refresh on the sparkling, and fix your apron, Brooks. The floor manager, a man named Donald who possessed all the warmth and empathy of a cold-blooded reptile, hissed the instruction as he walked past. You look like you slept in a dryer. Yes, Donald, Sienna murmured, smoothing the stark white fabric over her waist. She hadn't slept in a dryer, but she had slept in her battered 2008 Honda Civic the previous night. Her landlord had finally made good on his threat, changing the locks after she missed rent for the third month running. Her mother's mounting medical bills, ominous, stark white envelopes from Mount Sinai Hospital, had devoured everything. Every tip, every paycheck, every intellectual dream she had ever cultivated. Sienna picked up the heavy crystal pitcher of San Pellegrino and moved onto the floor. She was a ghost here. That was the primary job description. To be present yet utterly absent, to serve flawlessly but never to speak unless spoken to. She moved between the tables of senators, venture capitalists, tech moguls, and bored heiresses with practiced, fluid grace, her eyes always downcast. Tonight, however, the atmosphere in the vault was different. It was brittle, tense. The air felt charged, ready to shatter if someone dropped a fork too loudly. The source of the tension was the corner booth, designated table 1, the true power table. Sitting there was Lucas Gray. Even Sienna, who actively ignored the news just to save her sanity, knew who Lucas Gray was. He was the chief innovation officer of Gray Dynamics, an aerospace and engineering firm that had, until recently, been the shimmering darling of Wall Street. Rumors had been swirling for weeks. Their flagship project, a revolutionary eco-turbine designed to power entire cities, was proving to be a catastrophic, billion-dollar failure. Lucas looked like a man walking toward a firing squad. He was handsome, but in a rugged, utterly defeated way. His tie was loosened, his face the color of weak tea. Sitting opposite him was Preston Walsh, the vice president of operations. Preston was the kind of man who wore suits that cost more than Sienna's life earnings and carried a perpetual sneer to match. "It's over," Preston was saying, his voice carrying just enough for Sienna to hear as she approached the table to pour water. "The prototype overheated again in the simulations this morning. The thermal load is simply too high. The cooling matrix can't handle the torque. We can fix it? Lucas insisted, rubbing his temples as if trying to massage sanity back into his skull. We just need more time. Another week. We don't have time, Lucas. Preston snapped, slamming his hand down. The expensive silverware jumped. The Japanese investors are flying in tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. sharp. If we don't show them a working simulation, they pull the funding. That's $100 million, Lucas. Gone. The company goes under. We're bankrupt by Tuesday. Sienna approached the table silently. She knew her role. She was just the help. She was just the girl who poured the water. But as she tipped the heavy crystal pitcher toward Lucas's empty glass, her eyes drifted to the center of the table. Spread out across the white tablecloth, pushing aside untouched Wagyu steaks and truffle fries, were massive, complex blueprints. They were incredibly detailed schematics of a dual-intake turbine engine, and they were covered in angry red ink, furious circles marking every catastrophic failure point. Sienna's heart didn't skip a beat from romance. It skipped from a trauma response. 5 years ago, before the medical bills, before the paralyzing sickness, before her car became her bedroom, Sienna hadn't been a waitress. She had been a doctoral candidate at MIT, specializing in advanced fluid dynamics and thermodynamics. She had been the youngest student in her cohort, a prodigy who saw complex equations not as math, but as undeniable, elegant art. She looked at the blueprints. Her brain, starved of true intellectual stimulation for years, suddenly roared back to life. She saw the airflow vectors. She saw the heat dissipation channels. She saw the problem. It was glaring. It was obvious. They were attempting to force the primary cooling intake through a 90-degree manifold. It was creating an acute backpressure loop. It wasn't just stressing the system. It was choking the engine to death. Water! Preston barked, snapping his fingers sharply right in front of her face. Sienna flinched violently. The water sloshed, spilling slightly over the rim of Lucas's glass and onto the linen. "You clumsy idiot!" Preston shouted, rising to his feet, wiping a single droplet from his custom-tailored silk cuff. "Do you have any idea how much this suit costs? Jesus, Lucas, can we not afford competent staff while we hemorrhage millions?" "I'm so sorry, sir," Sienna whispered, grabbing a cloth napkin to dab at the small spill. "I'll get you a fresh napkin immediately. Just get away," Preston sneered, his voice dripping with aristocratic disdain. "Go get someone who knows what they're doing. Go back to whatever sewer you crawled out of." Lucas Gray finally looked up at her. His eyes were kind, but incredibly weary and sad. "It's okay," Lucas said softly, his tone a stark contrast to Preston's fury. "It's just water. Don't worry about it." "It's not just water, Lucas. It's incompetence," Preston fumed, sitting back down with a thud. "Just like your design team. Incompetent." Sienna backed away, clutching the water pitcher. Her heart was hammering violently against her ribs. She should walk away. She should retreat to the kitchen, lock herself in the walk-in freezer, and allow herself 5 minutes to silently weep before her next table. That was the safe thing to do. That was what the invisible girl was supposed to do. But she couldn't get the image of the blueprint out of her head. "The intake is wrong," her mind screamed, an internal voice she hadn't heard in years. "If they just angle the manifold by 15 degrees and add a small passive bypass valve, the pressure drops by 40%. It works. Fixes everything." She stood by the service station, watching them. Preston was now viciously berating Lucas again. Lucas had his head buried deep in his hands, defeat radiating off him. $100 million, thousands of jobs, Lucas's entire career. All gone because of a simple, fundamental geometry error. Sienna looked down at the tray of dirty plates she was supposed to clear to the kitchen. Then she looked at the heavy black Sharpie marker clipped to her apron, the one she used to scrawl down complex orders. She thought of her mother, lying in the hospital bed, her voice thin but firm, telling Sienna not to give up on her mind. She thought of the textbooks she had sold, one by one, just to buy enough ramen noodles to survive. "What do I have to lose?" she thought. the realization settling like ice water. I'm already at rock bottom. Sienna carefully put the tray down. She took a deep, stabilizing breath, gripped the black marker, and turned back toward table 1. The walk back felt monumental, like wading through thick, pressurized water. The sounds of the restaurant, the clinking of silverware, the murmur of conversations, the soft jazz, all faded into a dull, distant hum. All Sienna could see were the blue lines on the white paper. Preston was in the middle of a vicious tirade. You need to prepare your resignation letter, Lucas. When the board hears about this tomorrow, they will. Excuse me, Sienna said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was incredibly steady and commanding. Preston stopped mid-sentence. He looked up, his face twisting into a mask of pure, poisonous disbelief. You again? I thought. He cleared his throat loudly. I told you to. You're going to lose the contract, Sienna said, cutting him off cleanly. She wasn't looking at Preston. Her focus was laser-sharp on the schematics. The engine isn't failing because of the cooling matrix. The matrix is fine. You're misreading the sensor data. A crushing silence descended on the corner of the room. Lucas Gray slowly lifted his head, his tired eyes widening marginally. Excuse me, you're a waitress? Preston laughed, a cruel, barking sound that grated on the silence. Did you hear that, Lucas? The girl who can't pour water has an opinion on advanced aerospace engineering. Go away, honey. Go get my steak sauce. The heat isn't dissipating. Sienna continued, her voice gaining strength and momentum. She stepped closer to the table, ignoring the horrified sight of Donald, the manager, sprinting across the dining room toward her. It's because you have a severe turbulence pocket right here. She pointed a finger, not her whole hand, just the fingertip, at the intake manifold. The air is hitting the 90-degree turn and stalling, she explained, slipping into the rapid-fire cadence she used to use while defending her concepts in lecture halls. It's creating a catastrophic heat trap. The sensors think the matrix is failing to cool, but it's actually a flow restriction. You're suffocating the engine. Preston's face went purple with apoplectic rage. Get away from this table right now. Donald, get her out of here. Donald arrived, breathless and sweating profusely. I am so sorry, Mr. Walsh. I am so sorry. Brooks, you're fired. Get out now. Wait, Lucas said. His voice was quiet, but it carried an undeniable current of absolute authority. He held up a hand, stopping Donald cold. Lucas was staring intently at the spot Sienna had pointed to. He narrowed his eyes, tracing the line with his finger. Explain, Lucas said, looking directly at Sienna, truly seeing her for the first time. Lucas, don't indulge the help. This is embarrassing, Preston groaned, waving his hands dismissively. I said explain, Lucas repeated, his voice harder and colder this time. Sienna didn't hesitate. She uncapped the black marker. May I? Don't you dare touch those, Preston warned, nearly shrieking. Those are proprietary documents. Sienna didn't wait for permission. She leaned over the table. With a confident, incredibly fluid motion, she drew a diagonal line cutting through the sharp corner of the intake. Then she drew a small, precise circle adjacent to the new line. Change the angle to 105 degrees, she said, drawing an arrow pointing along the new path. And install a passive bypass valve here. It uses the pressure generated by the flow stall to force the hot, turbulent air out. It turns the problem into the solution. It's the Boney principle applied to a closed-loop system. She capped the marker and set it down on the table. The sound was stark, like a judge's gavel striking wood. You reduce the thermal load by at least 35%, she finished, stepping back. The simulation will pass. She stood up straight, the adrenaline beginning to crash, suddenly realizing the gravity of her action. She looked around. The entire section of the restaurant was staring. Donald looked like he was genuinely about to suffer a stroke. Preston looked ready to physically strangle her. But Lucas Gray was frozen. He was staring at the drawing she'd made. He pulled a sleek tablet from his briefcase, his fingers flying across the screen. He was inputting the new geometric parameters. He was running the math. "That's impossible," Preston muttered desperately. "A bypass valve would depressurize the—" "No," Lucas whispered, not looking up. "No, it wouldn't. Because she increased the angle, the volume remains constant." A loading bar appeared on Lucas's tablet, stark blue against the white screen. Simulation running. Sienna took a hesitant step back. I should go. I'm sorry." "You're damn right you're going," Donald hissed, grabbing her arm tightly. "Get your things. You're done in this city. I'll make sure you never work in a respectable restaurant again." Sienna allowed herself to be dragged away. She didn't fight. She felt a strange, intoxicating mixture of burning shame and pure exhilaration. She had lost her job. She was going to be sleeping on the street tomorrow. But for 30 seconds, she had been herself again. She had been Dr. Sienna Brooks, the engineer, not Sienna Brooks, the failure. She was halfway to the kitchen doors when a sound stopped her. It was a bright, triumphant digital chime from the tablet on table 1. Lucas Gray gasped. "My God!" he whispered. "What?" Preston demanded, leaning over the screen, his face frantic. "It failed, right? Tell me it failed." "Thermal efficiency." Lucas read from the screen, his voice shaking with disbelief and elation. 98%. Optimal flow achieved. Green light across the board. The room went dead silent. Lucas stood up so fast his chair tumbled backward onto the plush carpet. "Wait!" he shouted, his voice echoing in the sudden quiet. Sienna stopped at the swinging kitchen door. Donald froze, his hand still gripping her arm like a vice. Lucas Gray spun around, his eyes wide and stunned, looking at the solitary waitress standing in the shadows of the service hallway. He looked like a man who had just witnessed an undeniable, breathtaking miracle. "Who are you?" Lucas asked. Sienna turned slowly toward him. She lifted her chin, meeting his gaze. "My name is Sienna Brooks." "Where did you learn that?" Lucas asked, walking toward her, ignoring Preston, who was sputtering incoherent protests in the background. That solution? That's doctrinal-level fluid dynamics. That's Navier-Stokes theory applied perfectly. "I studied at MIT, Sienna said quietly, the admission feeling heavy and strange after years of silence. Before life happened." Preston finally scrambled to his feet, adjusting his suit jacket, desperately trying to regain control of the crumbling situation. "Luck," he scoffed loudly. "She guessed. It's a lucky scribble, Lucas. Don't let her hustle you. She probably heard someone talking about it on the news." Lucas ignored him completely. He stopped 3 feet from Sienna. He looked at her worn apron, her deeply tired eyes, her calloused hands trained for pouring water, not solving global engineering crises. He saw the genius hiding stubbornly behind the uniform. "You just saved my company," Lucas said, his voice husky with emotion. "You just saved 5,000 jobs." Sienna didn't know what to say. I saw the pattern." "You're fired," Donald whispered to her again, unable to process the revolutionary shift in the room's dynamic. "Go, Donald," Lucas said, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly low, lethal register. "If you touch her again, I will buy this building just to evict you personally." Donald released her arm as if it were a searing hot iron, stumbling backward. "Sienna," Lucas said, his attention focused entirely on her. "What time is your shift over?" I think it's over now," she stammered, glancing at the retreating Donald. "Good," Lucas said, a decisive finality in his tone. "Because you have a meeting." "A meeting?" Sienna asked, confused. "With me," Lucas confirmed, "and the Japanese investors. Tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. I need you to present this." Sienna laughed. A short, nervous, disbelieving sound. "Sir, I'm a waitress. I don't have a suit. I don't have a degree. I dropped out. I can't present to a billion-dollar board." Lucas smiled, and for the first time that night, he looked like the commanding CEO who could conquer the world. You solved a problem in 6 seconds that my entire, highly paid engineering department couldn't solve in 6 months, Lucas said. I don't care about your degree. I care about your mind. We'll get you a suit. We'll get you whatever you need. He reached into his inner jacket pocket and pulled out a business card. It was heavy black metal with elegant, subtle gold lettering. Be at Gray Dynamics Tower at 7 a.m. He commanded. Don't be late. Sienna took the card. Her hands were shaking violently. Preston Walsh marched up to them. His face twisted in utter fury and panic. Lucas, this is insanity. You cannot bring a servant to the merger meeting. The board will laugh us out of the room. I forbid it. Lucas slowly turned to Preston. The air temperature seemed to drop a palpable 10 degrees. You forbid it? Lucas asked softly, dangerously. Preston, you've been overseeing this project for 2 years. You've burned through $40 million of R&D budget. And she fixed it with a Sharpie marker. If I were you, I'd be very careful about what you say next. Lucas turned back to Sienna, his expression softening slightly. 7 a.m. Sienna, your life changes tomorrow. As Lucas Gray strode out of the restaurant, leaving a wake of stunned, absolute silence behind him, Sienna looked down at the heavy metal card in her hand. She didn't know it yet, but the fix on the blueprint was the easy part. The real danger. The corporate sabotage, the secrets Preston Walsh was hiding, and the reason her mother had truly gotten sick, was about to drag her into a world far more dangerous than poverty. Preston watched her retreating form. His eyes narrowed into predatory slits. He pulled out his phone and typed a single, quick text message. We have a problem. The waitress knows. Take care of it. The subway ride back to Queens was a blurring canvas of flickering fluorescent lights and rattling metal. Sienna sat clutching her tattered canvas bag to her chest. The heavy metal business card Lucas Gray had given her burning a hole in her apron pocket. The adrenaline was rapidly wearing off, replaced by a cold, creeping dread. She had just publicly humiliated Preston Walsh, a man whose ego was likely worth more than her entire neighborhood combined. She had seen the look in his eyes when she walked away. It wasn't just anger. It was the calculated look of a predator who realized its meticulously planned camouflage had just been spotted. Sienna got off at her stop, 36th Avenue. It was 11:30 p.m. The streets were slick with rain and oil, and the humidity made the air feel thick. She walked quickly, head down, navigating the murky puddles that reflected the flickering, unsteady street lamps. She didn't notice the large black Escalade idling ominously at the corner until she was only 10 feet away. The engine was off, but the lights were set to a dim, predatory amber glow. Sienna's step faltered. She knew every beat-up car on her block. It was a graveyard of rusted sedans and dented Hondas. An Escalade like that didn't belong here, unless it was selling something illegal or collecting a very serious debt. As she passed it, the driver's side window rolled down with a low, electric hum. M. Brooks, a voice stated. It wasn't a question. It was a declaration. Sienna froze instantly. She gripped the strap of her bag tighter. I don't have any money, she said, her voice a thin thread of fear. If you're looking for the rent, I told the landlord I'd have it by Friday. Get in the car, Sienna, the voice commanded, flat and devoid of emotion. A face leaned slightly into the light. It was a man with a thick neck and a stark white scar running vertically through his left eyebrow. He was wearing a dark, expensive suit that strained visibly against his enormous shoulders. He didn't look like a landlord. He looked like a cleaner. I'm not getting in, Sienna said, backing away slowly, forcing her feet to move. Who are you? Mr. Walsh wants to have a conversation about your future, the man said. He opened the door and stepped out. He was massive, easily 6.5 feet tall. He thinks you're confused about the situation. He wants to offer you a severance package. $50,000 cash tonight. Sienna's breath hitched painfully in her throat. That would pay for her mother's immediate surgery. That would wipe out the debt. It wasn't just money. It was freedom. All you have to do, the man continued, taking a slow, heavy step toward her. is hand me that business card Lucas gave you and disappear. Don't go to the meeting tomorrow. Take the money. Leave New York City tonight. Sienna looked at the enormous man, then down at the worn duffel bag in the back seat, where she could clearly see stacks of crisp bills bound by rubber bands. It was tempting. God, it was impossibly tempting to just take the money and run, to survive, to be safe. But then she remembered the blueprint. She remembered the flaw. It wasn't just a basic geometry error. The more she had thought about it on the rattling train ride home, the more something didn't sit right. The error was too rudimentary, too amateur. The team at Gray Dynamics were top-tier engineers, specialists in aerospace. How did 30 PhDs miss a basic fluid dynamics stall that was obvious even to an exhausted waitress? They hadn't missed it. Someone had intentionally put it there. If she took the money, she wasn't just walking away from a job opportunity. She was allowing someone to successfully sabotage a revolutionary company. And if that turbine failed in the real world, powering an entire city, people would die. No, Sienna whispered. The man stopped. Excuse me? He said, his voice hardening dangerously. No, Sienna said again, louder this time. She took another step back, her heel hitting the curb. Tell Preston Walsh to go to hell. The man sighed, a sound of profound, heavy disappointment. Wrong answer, sweetheart. He lunged forward with surprising speed for his size. Sienna didn't think. She reacted. Years of dodging grasping hands in crowded bars and navigating dangerous neighborhoods kicked in. She threw her heavy tote bag, filled with dense, expensive medical textbooks and her stiff uniform, straight at his face. The bag connected with a heavy, sickening thud, the sharp metal buckle smashing directly into his nose. The man roared in pain, stumbling back, clutching his face and momentarily blinded. Sienna spun and ran. She didn't run toward her apartment building. That was the first place they would look. She sprinted down the dark, narrow alleyway, jumping over leaking trash bags, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird beating its wings. She heard heavy, cursing footsteps splashing through puddles behind her. Get back here! She burst out onto the main avenue and saw a city bus pulling away slowly from the curb 50 feet ahead. She didn't check the number or the route. She just sprinted, waving her arms frantically in the rain. The driver, a tired-looking woman who had clearly seen too much of the night, saw the sheer, unadulterated terror in Sienna's face and mercifully slammed on the brakes. Sienna scrambled through the doors just as they hissed shut, collapsing into the nearest empty seat, gasping for air. Gasping for air, she watched out the window as the man in the bespoke suit emerged from the shadowy alley, wiping a smear of blood from his nose. He lifted his phone, watching the bus drive away, already dialing. Sienna knew she was safe for now, but the crushing realization hit her. She was entirely alone and had nowhere to go. Her apartment was compromised. Going to the hospital to check on her mother was too risky. They were likely watching it already. Sienna gripped the business card in her sweaty palm. Gray Dynamics Tower. 7 a.m. It was currently only midnight. She rode the bus until the last stop, then transferred to another line, starting a grim, sleepless pilgrimage. She spent the long hours moving, riding the continuous loop of the subway system, getting maybe 20 minutes of fragmented sleep at a time, her fingers clamped protectively around her worn canvas bag. At 5 a.m, she found a McDonald's restroom, splashing water on her face and using rough paper towels to dry her hair. Her reflection showed a woman who was pale, utterly exhausted, and haunted by terror. But at 6:45 a.m, she stood directly in front of the Gray Dynamics Tower. It was a monolith of razor-sharp glass and steel, an architectural titan piercing the dense morning fog of Manhattan. It looked less like an office building and more like an impenetrable fortress. Sienna walked into the lobby. It was silent, vast, and acoustically dead. The only sound the measured, echoing steps of the uniformed security guards patrolling the marble perimeter. She approached the front desk. "I'm here to see Lucas Gray," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. The security guard, a man whose buzz cut matched his severe, bored expression, looked her up and down slowly. Sienna was wearing oversized jeans and a bulky sweater she had pulled from her bag. She looked quite precisely like a homeless college dropout. "Mr. Gray doesn't take walk-ins," the guard stated flatly. "Move along, kid." "I have an appointment," Sienna insisted. 7 a.m. The guard let out a dry, theatrical laugh. "Right. And I have a lunch date with the president." "Get out." "Please," Sienna pleaded, a raw edge of desperation creeping into her tone. "Just check the list. My name is Sienna Brooks." "There is no list for people who look like you," the guard sneered, stepping out from behind the mahogany desk. "Leave now or I call the NYPD." Sienna felt the burning sting of tears pricking her eyes. After the attack, after running for her life, after a night of sleepless, terrifying transit, was she really going to be stopped by a lobby guard's petty judgment? "Is there a problem here?" The voice was crisp, undeniably British and utterly glacial. A woman stood near the brushed steel elevators. She was impeccable, a vision of corporate dominance, wearing a sharp, charcoal gray pencil skirt suit and holding a slim tablet like a weapon. Her vivid red hair was cut into a geometrically precise bob. "Just clearing out the riffraff, Ms. Vance," the guard reported, reaching out to grasp Sienna's arm. "Stop," the woman commanded. She walked toward them, her designer heels clicking rhythmically, mercilessly, on the polished marble. She stopped in front of Sienna, her assessing gaze sweeping over the girl's exhausted frame. Her eyes weren't warm, but they were deeply analytical. "You're the waitress." Sienna straightened her spine, pulling herself up to her full height, despite the crushing exhaustion. "I'm Sienna Brooks." The woman gave one sharp nod. "I'm Chloe Vance, Mr. Gray's executive assistant. He's been texting me since 4 in the morning, asking if you'd arrived yet. He was worried you wouldn't show." Sienna let out a breath she felt she had been holding captive in her lungs for 10 hours. "I made it." "Barely," Chloe noted, her eyes running dismissively over Sienna's threadbare attire. "The Japanese delegation arrives in 45 minutes. You cannot walk into a boardroom looking like you just survived a Category 5 hurricane." I didn't have time to go home," Sienna admitted. Chloe checked the slim, platinum watch on her wrist. "We have 40 minutes. Come with me." They rode the elevator, bypassing the executive boardroom floor and stopping instead at the 50th floor, which housed a sprawling private suite. Chloe moved with disconcerting, military precision. She opened a recessed wardrobe that seemed to be stocked with every conceivable piece of emergency corporate attire. "Mr. Gray maintains this wardrobe for visiting styling consultants and last-minute media shoots," Chloe explained, pulling out a garment bag wrapped in protective plastic. "You look about a size 4. This will have to do." She handed Sienna the garment bag. It wasn't just a suit. It was a charcoal Armani power suit, severely tailored, paired with a silk ivory blouse. "Put it on," Chloe commanded. "Bathroom is to your left. I'll go acquire makeup." 10 minutes later, Sienna stepped out. She walked to the floor-length mirror and involuntarily froze. The woman staring back wasn't the weary waitress who scraped pathetic tips off sticky tables. She wasn't the girl who sometimes slept in her car. The suit fit as if it had been custom-tailored for her body. The sharp lines of the jacket gave her shoulders an aggressive definition. The dark color made her exhausted, but intense blue eyes pop with startling clarity. She looked fierce. She looked intelligent. She looked unexpectedly dangerous. "Better," Chloe declared, handing her a pair of black pumps with 3-inch heels. "Now listen to me closely. Preston Walsh is already in the boardroom. He has brought in his own external engineers to verify the old, deliberately flawed data. He is going to try to bury you. He is going to try to make you look like an unqualified fraud." Sienna stepped into the shoes. She instantly felt taller, stronger, a different kind of woman entirely. "Let him try," Sienna said softly, the words laced with cold resolve. Chloe smiled then, a small, rare, and almost imperceptible expression. "Mr. Gray was right about you. You've got steel. Come on, it's showtime." The boardroom at Gray Dynamics was designed specifically to intimidate. The conference table was a 20-foot slab of polished black obsidian, mirroring the sleek, dark atmosphere of the luxury restaurant where Sienna had worked only 12 hours before. The walls were sheets of seamless glass, offering a dizzying, panoramic view of the Manhattan skyline, the very city Sienna had nearly been driven out of. Seated around the table were 6 men from Keto Heavy Industries, led by Mr. Keto himself, an elderly man with impeccably silver hair and piercing eyes that missed absolutely nothing. On the other side sat the Gray Dynamics team. Preston Walsh occupied the center position, radiating smug superiority. Behind him sat his own team of 3 nervous-looking external engineers. Lucas Gray stood at the head of the table. He looked tired and wired, but when the massive doors opened and Sienna walked in, his face lit up with immediate relief. "Gentlemen," Lucas said, his voice ringing out across the polished room. "May I introduce the lead consultant on the intake redesign, Ms. Sienna Brooks." Silence. An absolute, crushing silence fell over the table. Preston Walsh swiveled in his chair. When he saw Sienna, his smug expression momentarily faltered, replaced by stark shock. He clearly hadn't expected her to survive the night, let alone show up looking like a runway model for a Fortune 500 company. "Consultant?" Preston scoffed, recovering his composure almost instantly. "Lucas, please. This is the waitress who served me water last night. Gentlemen, I apologize. Our CEO seems to be having a mental breakdown. He's brought a service worker to brief you on advanced aerospace engineering." One of the Japanese investors murmured something low in Japanese to his colleague. They looked confused, their trust in the proceedings visibly shaken. Sienna felt her knees shaking uncontrollably under the table. Her heart pounded so hard she thought the high-sensitivity microphone on the table might pick up the frantic rhythm. "Don't look at them," she told herself firmly. Look at the problem. She walked to the front of the room, moving past Preston. She could smell his cologne, a heady mix of synthetic musk and crushing arrogance. "Mr. Walsh is correct," Sienna said, her voice clear, steady, and amplified by the room's hidden sound system. She didn't look at the investors. She focused her gaze on the giant screen where the failed schematic was currently displayed. "I was a waitress last night, and while serving Mr. Walsh, I noticed that your 90-degree manifold design was creating a 40% efficiency loss due to thermal stalling." She turned, finally facing the room, challenging them with her eyes. "Does anyone here care how the fire is put out? Or do you just want the building saved?" Mr. Keto, the delegation head, leaned forward, a flicker of genuine interest in his sharp eyes. "Proceed, Miss Brooks." Sienna gave a curt nod. She picked up the digital pointer. "The previous design relied heavily on forced air cooling," she began. She didn't need notes. The numbers were seared into her brain. "But at 15,000 RPM, the air acts less like a gas and more like a solid wall. You were essentially trying to push a brick through a straw." She clicked the remote. The screen instantly changed, displaying her new design, the one Lucas had rushed to digitize from the sketches on the tablecloth. "My design utilizes the stall effect itself. We angle the intake to 105 degrees. We create a vacuum pocket here." She pointed to the bypass valve on the schematic. "This sucks the heat out rather than trying to push cold air in. It is passive thermal management. It requires 0 energy to run." "Impossible," one of Preston's nervous external engineers blurted out. "The friction coefficient would be too high. Only if you use standard aluminum." Sienna countered instantly, whipping her head toward him, her eyes sharp. "But if you look at the specifications, I've switched the lining to a ceramic matrix composite." "Have you run the numbers on that specific material?" The engineer stammered, going pale. No, I didn't think." "Then you haven't done your job," Sienna finished, cold and matter-of-fact. Lucas Gray was watching her with a look of pure, unadulterated awe. She was systematically dismantling his senior staff, piece by technical piece. "This is all theoretical speculation," Preston interrupted, jumping to his feet. He was sweating now, his composure finally cracking. "Mr. Keto, this is a pretty drawing, but we have 0 proof. Our simulations show that the engine remains violently unstable. This girl is guessing." "Actually," Sienna said, maintaining eye contact with Preston. I ran a deeper diagnostic this morning. She hadn't, but she was bluffing, gambling everything on her quick assessment of the situation. She needed to see Preston's immediate physical reaction. She tapped the keyboard on the console, bringing up the raw, convoluted code of the original simulation, the strings of data that governed the virtual engine. When I looked at the failure logs, Sienna said, improvising confidently based on her hunch from the night before, I noticed a recurring error code. Error 404B. She saw it. Preston's left eye twitched. A tiny, involuntary spasm, quickly masked. Got you, she thought. Mr. Walsh, Sienna said, turning fully to him, her demeanor like ice. Can you explain what the 404B parameter is? It's a standard variance protocol, Preston stuttered, wiping his brow. It accounts for wind resistance in the high atmosphere. No, Sienna said, her voice dropping to a dangerous low. It is a governor. It's a line of code inserted to deliberately cap the RPMs at 80% capacity. The engine didn't fail because of the design, Mr. Walsh. It failed because the simulation was programmed to fail. The room erupted into chaos. What is the meaning of this? Mr. Keto demanded, slamming his palm flat on the obsidian table. Lucas Gray stared at Preston, his face darkening with a terrible, slow-motion realization. Preston, did you throttle the simulation? Lucas whispered, the pain evident in his voice. She's lying, Preston shouted, pointing a shaking finger directly at Sienna. She doesn't know code. She's a dropout. She's trying to frame me. I can prove it, Sienna said calmly, ignoring his outburst. Delete line 450 of the code. Run the simulation again. Lucas stepped forward, pushing the stunned keyboard operator aside. He quickly scrolled, finding the damning line. Asterisk set underscore max underscore RPM underscore warning equals 0. Lucas looked at Preston, the betrayal in his eyes heartbreakingly obvious. You were tanking the stock, Lucas whispered, understanding everything now. You wanted the deal to fail. Why? To drive the price down so you could buy out the division. Preston didn't answer. He looked around the room, realizing he was utterly cornered. Lucas hit the delete key. Then he hit run. The giant screen on the wall displayed the engine's virtual model. The turbine spun up rapidly. The numbers climbed 80%, 90%, 100%, 105%. The thermal indicators stayed solid green. Efficiency, the computer voice announced clearly. 2%. The room was silent for a single, heavy heartbeat, and then Mr. Keto began to clap. A slow, measured, rhythmic applause that filled the tense space. Brilliant, Mr. Keto said, his face breaking into a satisfied smile. Absolutely brilliant, Mr. Gray. You have your funding. On one condition. Anything, Lucas said instantly, not taking his eyes off Preston, who was now visibly trembling. She runs the project, Keto said, gesturing firmly at Sienna. Sienna stood there, suddenly breathless. The adrenaline that had carried her through the night was beginning to crash violently. She gripped the edge of the podium for support. Security, Lucas barked. 2 large guards instantly entered the room. Escort Mr. Walsh out of the building and call the legal department. I want a full forensic audit of everything he's touched in the last 10 years. Preston Walsh was dragged out, kicking and screaming obscenities. You'll regret this, Lucas. You have no idea who you're messing with. She's a liability. She's got baggage. As the heavy doors closed on Preston's muffled screams, Lucas walked over to Sienna. He looked at her with a profound mix of gratitude and intense, clinical curiosity. You realize the code was rigged, Lucas said softly. How? You didn't even look at the computer until just now. Sienna met his gaze evenly. I played poker with my dad before he died. Preston has a tell. When he lies under pressure, he touches his left cufflink. He did it every single time he mentioned the simulation data. Lucas laughed, a sound of genuine, total relief that broke the tension of the room. Remind me never to play cards with you, Ms. Brooks. He extended his hand formally. Welcome to Gray Dynamics, Ms. Brooks. Or should I say Director Brooks? Sienna took his hand. felt warm and solid, grounding her. For the first time in 5 years, she felt a real, tangible future opening up before her. But just as the handshake ended, Sienna's cracked smartphone buzzed insistently in her pocket. She ignored it at first, focusing on Lucas, but it buzzed again, then immediately a third time. "You should get that," Lucas said gently. "We're done here." Sienna reluctantly pulled out the phone. It was a text message from an unknown number. "Congratulations on the promotion. You think you won? Go check on your mother." Sienna's blood turned instantly to ice. The phone slipped from her numb fingers and clattered onto the expensive obsidian table. "Sienna?" Lucas asked, his smile evaporating instantly. "What's wrong now?" "My mom," Sienna whispered, the room starting to spin violently. They went to the hospital." The ride to Mount Sinai Hospital was a terrifying blur of weaving traffic and screeching tires. Lucas Gray drove his Aston Martin like he was piloting a fighter jet through city streets, his knuckles white against the leather steering wheel. Beside him, Sienna was frantically trying to call the nurse's station. Her hands shaking so badly, she dropped the phone twice. "They're not answering," she choked out, staring at the screen in despair. "Why aren't they answering?" "We're 2 minutes out," Lucas said, his voice grim and focused. "Hold on." When the car screeched to a halt at the emergency entrance, Sienna didn't wait for it to stop completely. She threw the heavy door open and sprinted into the lobby, her expensive designer heels clattering awkwardly on the linoleum floor. Lucas was right behind her, tossing the keys to a stunned valet before following. Sienna ran to the elevators, hammering the button repeatedly. *4th floor. "I see you." When the doors opened, the scene that greeted her was pure chaos. 2 large orderlies were urgently pushing a gurney down the hallway. On it lay a frail woman with thinning gray hair, hooked up to a portable oxygen tank and a complex network of monitors. It was Martha, Sienna's mother. "Mom!" Sienna screamed, running forward. A nurse stepped immediately into her path, holding a clipboard like a shield. "Ma'am, you can't be here. We are in the middle of a critical transfer." "Transfer?" Sienna shoved past the nurse, grabbing the rail of the gurney. Her mother looked pale, her eyes fluttering open, confused and terrified. "Where are you taking her?" "She's too sick to move. We received a notification from the billing department 10 minutes ago," a doctor said, stepping out of a nearby room. He looked apologetic, but his stance was firm. The private grant funding Mrs. Brooks's treatment was revoked retroactively. It's been flagged as fraudulent. "Fraudulent?" Sienna gasped. "That's impossible. The charity was a shell company," Lucas said, stepping up beside Sienna. His presence instantly sucked the air out of the hallway, halting the medical staff. He looked down at the doctor who had revoked the funding. The doctor blinked, recognizing the billionaire instantly. "Mr. Gray, the order came from the guarantor, a Walsh Holdings LLC. Sienna felt the last vestiges of blood drain from her face. Preston. He hadn't just tried to fire her. He had been paying for her mother's specialized care through that shell company for months, keeping it as strategic leverage in case he ever needed to silence her. He held the plug in his hand, and he had just yanked it. "She's being transferred to the county facility," the doctor explained weakly. "We can't keep her here without payment." "She won't survive the transport," Sienna yelled, hot tears streaming down her face. "Her heart monitors are unstable." "I'm sorry," the doctor said, holding his hands up. "My hands are tied." "Untie them," Lucas said. He pulled a thick checkbook from his jacket pocket. He didn't ask for a pen. He used a gleaming gold fountain pen from his breast pocket. He scribbled quickly, tore the check out with a violent rip, and slammed it onto the doctor's clipboard. The doctor looked at the number. His eyes widened dramatically. He looked at Lucas, then back at the check. "Mr. Gray, this is $5 million. That buys the wing," Lucas said coldly. "She stays. In fact, move her to the presidential suite. Get the best cardiologists in the state on the phone. If she so much as coughs, I want 3 Nobel Prize winners standing over her bed. Do you understand?" The doctor nodded frantically, completely cowed. Yes, absolutely." Turn the gurney around. Now. The orderly spun the bed back toward the ICU. Sienna grabbed her mother's frail hand, squeezing it tightly. It's okay, Mom. You're safe. I'm here. Martha looked up at her daughter, weak but managing a gentle smile. You look beautiful, Sienna. Like a boss. I am a boss? Mom. Sienna whispered, kissing her forehead tenderly. I'm a boss now. As they settled Martha back into her highly monitored room, Lucas stepped into the hallway to take an urgent call. When he returned moments later, his face was the color of ash. Sienna, he said softly, avoiding her eyes. We have a severe problem. Is it Preston? She asked, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. Preston has disappeared, Lucas confirmed. But before he went completely off-grid, he accessed the Gray Dynamics mainframe remotely. He didn't just mess with the simulation data. Sienna stood up, the exhaustion instantly forgotten. What did he do? He initiated the burn protocol on the physical prototype, Lucas said, his voice taut with suppressed panic. The actual engine in the basement of the tower. He turned off the cooling pumps and locked the control room doors. The turbine is spinning up to 20,000 RPM. It's going to turn into a bomb. How much time? Sienna demanded. 20 minutes, Lucas confirmed. If that turbine shatters, it takes down the foundation of the tower. Takes down the whole building. Sienna looked at her sleeping mother one last time. Then she looked at Lucas. She kicked off the expensive, impractical high heels. She couldn't run in them. Let's go, she said. The Gray Dynamics tower was already in full evacuation mode when they arrived back downtown. Sirens wailed, piercing the pre-dawn air. Fire trucks were surrounding the perimeter, but the fire chief was holding his men back, his face rigid with fear. It's too dangerous, the chief yelled as Lucas and Sienna ducked under the yellow police tape. We're detecting massive thermal spikes in the subbasement. The structure is unstable. That's exactly why we're going in, Lucas shouted back. They sprinted through the empty lobby, past the abandoned security desk. The elevators were locked down by emergency protocol. Stairs, Sienna commanded. They ran down the concrete stairwell, descending into the belly of the screaming beast. The air grew perceptibly hotter with every turn. By the time they reached the subbasement door, the heavy metal handle was warm to the touch. Sienna used Lucas's keycard to override the security lock. The heavy steel door hissed open, and a wall of stifling, radiant heat hit them like a physical blow. The turbine room was a cavernous, terrifying space filled with the high-pitched, screaming whine of the engine. In the center of the room, the massive prototype, a beast of chrome and steel the size of a semi-truck, was vibrating violently. Red warning lights strobed against the dense steam venting from cracked pipes. The digital controls are locked out. Lucas yelled over the deafening noise, running straight for the glass-walled control booth. He hammered on the keyboard. Preston encrypted the shutdown sequence. I can't stop it. Sienna ran to the railing overlooking the machine. She looked down at the core. She could see the intake manifold, the one she had redesigned on a napkin sketch. But the bypass valve she had drawn, it had a manual override wheel. It was located right next to the main combustion chamber. Lucas, she screamed. The manual override. We have to open the bypass valve by hand. It will dump the pressure. It's too hot down there. Lucas yelled back, looking frantically at the temperature gauge in the booth. It's 140 degrees near the core. You'll burn up. If we don't, everyone dies. Sienna screamed back. She didn't wait for permission. She vaulted over the railing, dropping 10 feet onto the metal grating of the floor below. The heat was instantly suffocating. It felt like breathing pure fire. Her silk blouse stuck to her skin instantly with sweat. She ran toward the vibrating turbine. The noise was absolutely deafening, a high-pitched scream of metal being pushed far beyond its physical limits. She reached the manual wheel. It was red-hot iron. Sienna looked around frantically. She grabbed a discarded, heavy welding jacket hanging on a nearby rack and wrapped the thick material around her hands. She grabbed the wheel and pulled. It wouldn't budge. Come on, she grunted, putting her entire weight into the effort. The violent vibration of the engine rattled her teeth. The pressure holding the valve shut was immense. Suddenly, a figure appeared beside her. It was Lucas. He had jumped down, too. He was in his shirt sleeves, his expensive tie gone. He grabbed the other side of the wheel. On 3. Lucas roared, his voice barely audible. 1, 2, 3. They pulled together. Sienna screamed with the effort, feeling her muscles tear and strain. Lucas's face was contorted, streaked with sweat and exertion. Asterisk screech. Asterisk the metal groaned in protest, and the wheel turned half an inch. Again, Sienna yelled. They heaved again. The wheel turned a full rotation, then another. With a massive whoosh, a blast of superheated steam erupted violently from the bypass valve, shooting upward toward the vents with tremendous force. The pressure gauge on the wall dropped instantly. The agonizing, high-pitched shriek of the overloaded engine finally began to dissipate, the sound dropping rapidly from a raw, tearing scream to a deep, resonant hum. The violent shaking that had rattled their bones eased into a mere tremor. Sienna sagged against the cool, unforgiving surface of the metal grating, every muscle fiber protesting, sucking in huge, ragged breaths of the stale, pressurized air. Her lungs felt scorched. Next to her, Lucas, a silhouette of sweat, grime, and oily soot, collapsed in sheer exhaustion. They stared, mesmerized, as the central turbine spun down, the cluster of angry emergency red lights fading, yielding first to a reassuring amber pulse, and finally stabilizing on a calm, victorious green. Lucas choked out, turning his head slowly toward her, his voice heavy with disbelief. You are utterly, fantastically insane. Sienna let out a laugh, a dry, hacking sound that tasted of dust and adrenaline. She held up her hands, inspecting the layers of black grease and oil caked onto them. I'm just a waitress, remember? Not anymore, Lucas stated, the finality ringing in his voice. He reached out, his soot-streaked fingers closing firmly around her own. Never again will you be just anything. The relative quiet was violently shattered as the heavy, reinforced door of the pressurized chamber blew inward. A torrent of disciplined noise and motion followed. Heavily armed SWAT teams, their assault rifles raised and aimed, flooded the submarine-like space, immediately followed by the fire chief and a security detail. Clear. A booming voice confirmed. Room is clear. Target secured. Then, dragged forward roughly from behind the line of tactical uniforms, came the main objective. 2 plainclothes officers escorted Preston Walsh, now subdued and shackled. He was wearing an expensive, rumpled trench coat and trying futilely to conceal a flimsy, clearly fake passport in his pocket. He had been apprehended near the rarely used service exit, attempting a desperate, last-minute bolt. When Preston's eyes finally registered Sienna and Lucas, sitting alive, right next to the silent, perfectly stabilized core engine, his carefully constructed facade shattered. There was no theatrical outburst, no plea, no physical resistance. He simply slumped, his shoulders dropping in utter, absolute defeat, beaten by the very woman he had deemed utterly insignificant, the one he had tried so hard to professionally erase. Sienna pushed herself up, her legs still unsteady, but her posture radiating a new, unwavering authority. She walked slowly toward Preston. He craned his neck, meeting her gaze with a visceral, burning hatred. You're nothing, he hissed, the words laced with pure contempt. You're just cheap trash from Queens. Sienna leaned down, her face inches from his, her voice dropping to a cool, lethal whisper. I'm the woman who just cleaned up your catastrophic mistake, she murmured. And I'm the one who will be signing your termination papers. 6 months later, the rain falling over Manhattan was not the abrasive, punishing deluge of that night. It was a gentle, cleansing drizzle, polishing the city's concrete towers. Sienna Brooks approached the familiar obsidian-paneled restaurant, but this time, her entry was fundamentally different. She didn't slip in through the anonymous service entrance near the kitchen. She walked straight through the front door. The new maitre d', a polished professional who had replaced the disgraced Donald, fired the morning after the catastrophic incident, executed a deep, respectful bow. "Good evening, Ms. Brooks. Your preferred table awaits." Sienna glided across the dining room. She wore a tailored navy blue sheath dress, an item worth more than her entire life savings just a year prior. Her dark hair was styled loosely, a sleek cascade over her shoulders. She slowed near table 42. A young waiter was paralyzed by a simple task: opening an expensive bottle of vintage wine. His hands trembled visibly, slick with nervous sweat, magnifying his terror under the cold scrutiny of the affluent diners. Sienna paused, a familiar ache of empathy stirring in her chest. She reached out, her touch light but steady on his forearm. "Breathe," she instructed softly, her voice low enough for only him to hear. "Twist the bottle, not the corkscrew." The young man looked up, startled, recognizing the efficiency in her demeanor. He executed the subtle maneuver. The cork extracted with a clean, satisfying pop. A tidal wave of relief washed over his face. "Thank you, Mom," he whispered, the gratitude genuine and immediate. Sienna offered him a knowing smile. "Hang in there. You never know who's watching." She continued her journey to the coveted corner booth, table 1, the nexus of power in the room. Lucas Gray rose the moment she approached, his attention solely on her, pulling out her chair with a grand, courtly gesture. "You're late," he teased gently, a definite twinkle of affection in his eyes. "I had a board meeting," Sienna replied, sinking into the plush leather. "The new generation intake manifolds are rolling off the Tokyo assembly line right on schedule. We just clocked another 12% improvement in energy efficiency." "Show off," Lucas chuckled, pouring her a glass of vintage sparkling water with the solemnity of serving champagne. "On a more important note, how is Martha?" "She's great," Sienna said, beaming at the thought of Lucas's mother. "She's completely taken over the garden again. And she wanted to know exactly when you're coming over for dinner. She's determined to make her famous meatloaf." "I wouldn't miss Martha's meatloaf for the world," Lucas vowed. He reached across the perfectly set table, taking her hand in his. "We need to discuss the Asia expansion strategy. And I need a chief technology officer who is prepared to travel extensively and oversee implementation." "Are you offering me a promotion?" Sienna asked, raising an eyebrow. "I've only been VP of engineering for 6 months. I am not offering a promotion," Lucas corrected, his voice dropping to that serious, intense, captivating tone she remembered from their very first terrifying night in the control room. "I'm offering a partnership. A real one. 50/50. Sienna let her gaze drift slowly across the impeccable dining room. She located the exact spot near the service station where she used to stand, utterly invisible, always clutching a heavy carafe of iced water. She saw the ghost of the worn, exhausted girl she had once been, trapped in the shadows of this very room. She tightened her grip on Lucas's hand, grounding herself firmly in the present. "Deal," she declared, a quiet triumph in her tone. "But I pick the restaurant next time." Lucas grinned, his relief palpable. "As long as the service is excellent." Sienna Brooks, the invisible waitress who engineered the salvation of a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate using nothing more than a felt-tip pen and an audacious second chance, lifted her glass of sparkling water. "To looking closer," she proposed. Lucas gently clinked his glass against hers, the delicate sound echoing the weight of their future. "To looking closer. They say that luck is simply preparation recognizing opportunity." Sienna Brooks spent years preparing in the periphery, meticulously studying engineering schematics while pouring coffee, constantly learning even as she was ignored. She proved, undeniably, that true genius does not adhere to a specific dress code or uniform, and that the person serving you dinner might well be the only one equipped to save your life. Preston Walsh is currently serving a 10-year sentence in a federal facility for multiple counts of corporate espionage and systemic fraud. Gray Dynamics now stands as the undisputed global leader in advanced clean energy technology, and Sienna. She never fails to leave a 50% tip. She knows intimately precisely what it costs to stand on the other side of the table. If Sienna's incredible journey from the breadline to the boardroom has inspired you, Please hit that like button now. It helps us share more essential stories of underdogs reclaiming their fundamental power. Don't forget to subscribe and activate the notification bell so you never miss a vital twist. And tell us in the comments below, have you ever been fundamentally underestimated by someone in power? What specific action did you take? We want to hear your story of silent victory. Thanks for watching, and always remember, never let anyone define you as just anything.